For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for more updates.
This is StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh. Revi. On Talking Point today, our guest is Ambassador Sujan Chinoy. He's the Director General of the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defence Studies and Analysis and the Chair for the T20, that's the Think 20 engagement group for India's G20 presidency. Ambassador Chinoy, absolutely thrilled that you could find time for us at such a significant moment of time in history and when it's very busy for you, sir.
Well, thank you very much for having me on your show.
Ambassador, I want to take off actually from your book. That is, The World Upside Down and India Recalibrates its Geopolitics, and look at the G20 summit. It's a great takeoff point, I think. If you could just talk about India navigating its space in this fragmented world order that we are currently in. Your thoughts on that, sir, first.
Thank you very much for raising the issue of my book as well. It's aptly titled World Upside Down, India Recalibrates its Geopolitics. So what I'm suggesting through this title is what you're witnessing all around today, a world which is fragmented. It's a world in which there is rapid flux. No single country today is in a position to make its writ felt on all issues, in all geographies at all times. And in such a scenario, we have seen over the last few years that there is weakened multilateralism. The traditional structures that provide stability at the multilateral level, that is the UN system, the WTO, the multilateral development banks, the international financial institutions, are not quite in a position to deal with the emerging challenges, especially the big challenges of debt distress, economic recovery, climate finance. And this in particular is an area where you require consensus, not just at the level of governments. You require the participation of all the peoples of the world. And in many ways, I would say that India has actually quite shown the democratic way forward, a values-based approach to growth and development, and a framework in which all the peoples of the world can actually be stakeholders in the sort of challenge of meeting head-on the emerging challenges.
The emerging challenges, Ambassador, now when you look at the G20 specifically, I know it's not meant for geopolitical solutions, it's looking more at economic solutions, but geopolitics plays its role everywhere. And when we see leaders like President Xi Jinping not attending or choosing to skip this, various analysts who have different reasons for it, whether it's internal, whether it's because of relations with India or relations with the US or something else. How do you see something like Xi Jinping missing the G20 summit impacting both China and the summit itself?
Well, first, a look at the UN system itself and to see how the G20 compares. It's quite obvious, isn't it, that the G20 is not the UN Security Council, and it is certainly not the G7, though the G7, like many other groupings, are to be found within the G20. That is to say, the BRICS are part of, not the expanded BRICS, but the original BRICS, are part of the G20 grouping, as is IBSA, as is the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, as are also the G4, the four countries, India, Japan, Brazil, and Germany, that would like to see an expanded UN Security Council with permanent membership, for themselves as well. So the G20 is really like a dream team. At a time when the multilateral structures are eroded and are not performing, and some would say they are dysfunctional, even if you were to put a team together, you would not be able to put together a dream team like the G20. So the G20 is a team that can actually deal with the challenges of today. The G20 is, as you are well aware, not meant to deal with politico-security matters. It's not meant to deal with issues of war and peace. And the G20 is essentially founded on the basis of the centrality of economic issues, developmental issues, issues to do with macroeconomic stability and fiscal stability and things of the sort. And so this is a group in which it's very good if leaders can come together. And while there is a gridlocked highway of multilateralism, as I put it, this is like a wayside station, the G20, where people can pull out of a traffic jam, stretch their legs, have a coffee together, and discuss things dispassionately. Now, whether or not leaders are able to participate in G20 summits is a separate matter. Normally, leaders have very busy schedules. They have domestic and other compulsions. It's quite obvious that Mr. Putin has several other priorities. But equally, I should say that President Xi Jinping may also have priorities associated with the economic situation back home or political matters to do with the inner workings of the Communist Party of China. And it's not for the first time that leaders have skipped G20 summits. In Bali, for instance, Russia, Brazil, and Mexico had skipped the summit at the leadership level. And if you go a little further back to 2021, to Rome, mind you, Rome at that time was a country that had bought into the Belt and Road Initiative.
Correct.
But if you go back and see the list of participants, you see that Russia, China, Japan, Mexico, Saudi Arabia, and South Africa, that's a total of 6 countries did not participate at the summit level. So I don't think it's something over which I would lose much sleep. If China is represented by Premier Li Qiang, I think it's par for the course. For a premier, would also represent China's interests as much as the president would. So I would read too much into it.
Since we are on the topic of China, sir, and you deal a lot of it in your book, you've been anchoring the group, you did anchor the group which dealt with CBMs and border issues for, I think, about 5-6 years as well. What are your thoughts on how India and China have handled or mishandled the border issue?
Well, there's nothing that we have mishandled. India has always been committed to a peaceful resolution of the boundary question. This is something that we have said for long, and we have actually lived up to all our commitments in the numerous protocols and agreements that we have concluded with China, many of which I was directly associated with in the formulation and the implementation as well. For example, the 1993 Border Peace and Tranquility Agreement, or the equally important 1996 CBMs agreement, to just give 2 examples. There are many that followed also. The foundational principle of our relations is expected to be peace and tranquility, mutual trust and confidence between the 2 sides. But in this case, we have seen that China has not only risen as a big economy, but it's been translating its economic power into military power. And if that were not enough, it has also projected a great deal of unilateralism and military coercion on its periphery with regard to India. So the shattering of the protocols and agreements has come from the Chinese side, not from the Indian side. We have currently, and as I bring out in my book as well, we have taken the position that peace and tranquility in the India-China border areas is a prerequisite for a full normal relationship in which we can work together for mutual benefit. Now we can normalize the existence of a boundary dispute. We can normalize the fact that it will take many years to resolve. And alongside, we can normalize the fact that there will be many more rounds of negotiations. But we cannot normalize the fact of bloodshed and more bloodshed in the India-China boundary areas. And this is what the Chinese would like us to do. They would like us, under the current circumstances, to normalize not just the existence of a boundary dispute, but normalize great tension and fundamental instability in the border areas, which comes from 50 to 60,000 troops facing one another. So we have to disengage, and thereafter we can begin to look at ways and means to normalize our ties.
Just picking up on the last point that you made, Ambassador, now, even in the book, if I remember correctly, you say that India-China ties, if they are to normalize, India and China have to coexist with each other. And I think you say that China has to treat India as an equal. Do you see any manifestation of that? I mean, from the points that you raised and what we've seen, the Chinese behavior, it doesn't seem at all.
Well, as you know, India and China are neighbors, and we will have to live together in the future in peace and harmony. That is the preferred option in the interests of the peoples of both countries. And so I think it is important that China takes the necessary steps to undo the situation that has been created as a result of its actions. There's a saying in Chinese, he who ties the knot should untie it. But having said that, there is no gainsaying the fact that India and China should have better relations. It's a very important relationship, and I do hope that we can achieve that also. It is important that this relationship be based on mutual respect and also reciprocity. And it has to be a relationship as between equals. There is no room here for domination or for unilateralism, nor for unilateral imposition of any kind of vision for the region. If we can reach that level of understanding between neighbors, I'm sure there will be better days ahead for India and China in their bilateral relationship. I very much hope we can get there.
But do you see China, whether it's looking at its historical aspect or whether it's looking at its future? Because there are many analysts who say China, one, is looking at some point of time to replace the US as the hegemon, and definitely in Asia is looking to be the unipolar head. So how does that fit in with India navigating, as you say, recalibrating its geopolitics?
So it's quite true that China has been rising in terms of its economic power. And as I said, unfortunately, it has also translated this economic power into a coercive kind of militarization. But China is not a global military power. China is a global economic power as the world's second largest economy. It has a trading presence in virtually every corner of the world. There is no denying that fact. But China is certainly not a global military power. Its aspirations are also of the type that seek to kind of ensure and limit the extent of US power on its periphery. That's where it wants to begin with exhibition of its military power. And by periphery, I also mean the borderlands with India. And China seeks a certain kind of primacy, centrality in Asia. China believes that this is something that is an ancestral right. I think they are a little off the mark there. And it's true that China has been advocating policies that suggest not just the centrality and primacy of China and its interests on its periphery, most recently evidenced by the publication of this map that claims just about everybody's territories, but also because China, ironically, at the international level, seeks multipolarity. But then what's good for the goose is equally good for the gander. If there is a need for greater multipolarity and a flatter world at the international level, global level, equally then in Asia, it is untenable that we countenance the emergence of a single dominating power that believes in hierarchy, that believes in unipolarity. So I think this is where India actually comes in. Regardless of what India says or does, India is an ancient civilization with strategic autonomy. It has the key fundamentals to rise well into the 21st century. It is destined to rise, and I am absolutely sure that India's robust growth is going to be a very big factor in the emergence of a more democratic, a flatter, a multipolar Asia as well. And this is going to happen regardless of whether India has partnerships with one or the other. If India gets into strategic partnerships, as it has a right to do, to advance its own growth and prosperity in high technologies as well, then that only means that there are many more countries apart from India, like-minded countries, that share the same values of openness and transparency and the freedoms of navigation and overflight, those that believe that there is no room here for domination and hierarchy in Asia.
You mentioned earlier when I asked you about leaders not attending like the G20 summit, and you mentioned President Putin, understandable, the war in Ukraine, etc. But he's not been going abroad very much for multilateral summits. There's only some reports suggesting he might go for the BRI forum. But I wanted to ask you, in line with what you've been writing over the years and speaking about as well, on India's role as, say, a bridge between not only the North and South, but the East and the West as well. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I think India is singularly well placed to bring about some kind of unity, build consensus, give a healing touch to the rifts and the chasms that have emerged between various parts of the world. So I think India is traditionally trusted. It has credibility with the global South under the leadership of Prime Minister Modi, and particularly during our G20 presidency. You have seen the enthusiasm with which India has emerged as a voice for the global South. And this is basically not to position India as a leader. Perish the thought. The whole idea that India has here is to advance the interests of the global South. But those that are inimical to our interests may try to project the image that India is trying to dominate and take on the mantle of leadership, etc. I don't think that's the driving principle here. The driving principle is that India wants to make this G20 a platform for all the peoples. And that is why the Prime Minister of India engaged 125 countries at the Voice of the Global South summit earlier this year. So I think India can play this role. India has very good relations with the West. India has excellent ties with the United States of America, with big European powers such as, to name a few, France and Germany. And India shares many values with them, democracy being one of them. Of course, democracy is practiced differently in different parts of the world, and so democracy is to be seen as a spectrum. This is not to say that the democracy that everybody must practice is the democracy to be defined out of a Western capital. But within that broad, ecosystem of democracy, India is not just connected to the West, but also many flourishing democracies in the global South. The global South is an area, is a cluster that's not strictly geographic in that sense. It has much to do with economic and developmental issues. And so India is very well placed. Regions around the world have growing faith in India. We have never imposed ourselves on others. We have never tried to give any kind of assistance or forge partnerships which prioritize our interests. Our whole mantra when it comes to giving any kind of assistance or offering any kind of partnership, I should say, to other countries for connectivity and for development has always been predicated on the principle that it should be done at a comfort level that is acceptable to the host country. and that it's the host country's priorities that would drive this relationship. I'm not quite sure if there are too many of the large and emerging economies that work on this principle. We have seen the other example of the Belt and Road, which has actually created a lot of debt distress of its own kind. And so India is not working on that principle at all. I would say, therefore, I agree with you. India is the one country that offers the binding glue to bring everyone on the same pedestal.
And how important for India and for the G20 summit is it that there should be a joint communique, declaration, whatever you want to call it? And if that doesn't emerge through consensus, what does that mean?
Well, I have also spent a fair bit of time at the United Nations working in our permanent mission there, and I've sat through umpteen meetings and negotiations, and so I would not attach undue importance to the linkage between the communique and the success of the G20 presidency. The point I'm trying to make to you is that India's G20 presidency is already a resounding success, for we have to judge it on the basis of what we have seen over the past 1 year. The innumerable meetings that we have convened, the 100,000 people that have visited India and participated in more than 200 meetings and convenings around the country in virtually every city of India. 60 cities have hosted the G20 events, either the formal governmental track or the engagement group meetings. As the Think 20 chair of the G20 presidency, I'm happy to inform you that we ourselves organized more than 60 meetings throughout the country in the course of the year, and we engaged more than 135 experts and scholars from India as well as around the world. So with this kind of an approach, India's G20 presidency is already a success. Having said that, let me say that the communique is very important if it demonstrates consensus on key issues pertaining to the global economy and particularly developmental issues. That would be like icing on the cake. But usually in a group such as G20, in which there is no privileged participation, everybody is kind of equal there. And in a sense, you can say that everyone has a chance to exercise some kind of veto. In groups such as this, usually we go in for what we call full consensus, or if that is not achievable, we go in for near consensus. And having achieved near consensus, there is every possibility that one can also add a few sentences that some delegations saw it differently. So there is a way out of this, and I do hope that there will be a broad consensus. I think the participation of very important leaders of many countries, including President Biden from the United States, will also make a difference. And I hope that holdouts, if any, on any issue, they could be countries from, our part of the world or another part of the world who have some views, reservations. I think these can be ironed out. But I won't link the communique and the outcomes to whether or not India's G20 presidency was a success. Let me tell you conclusively, there is already a great success. For it's not a T20 match. And you have to judge the presidency on the basis of an entire year-long effort. And we have created the right kind of foundation now to enable the next presidency, also from a developing country, Brazil, and thereafter South Africa, to take many of these themes forward.
I just want to get your thoughts on whether it's bilaterals on the sidelines of multilateral formats like this, or summits of the G20, and even there is a reported state visit that MBS will have, the Saudis will have post that. But just the importance of that, the opportunity it gives leaders to have bilateral engagements as well.
Well, every large convening is a great opportunity, a great chance for leaders to interact at the bilateral level. And such bilateral meetings actually help leaders review not only the bilateral relationship, but the kind of convergence and consensus that needs to be built with regard to common challenges facing humanity today in the regional or the plurilateral context. And so I think the G20 presidency of India, our summit that's coming up, will also offer this kind of opportunity to all the leaders that are participating in the event.
Opportunities, like you're saying, and some analysts say challenges, and President Xi possibly didn't come because he didn't want any kind of bilateral engagement with the US or with India. But that's that apart. You talked a lot about the global South, and when you talk about G20 as being a dream team, just lead us through your thoughts on the leadership of the chairs of the G20 being from the global South. Indonesia handed over to India, and then it's Brazil, and then South Africa.
Well, it's a rotating presidency, as you know. It comes to a particular country once in roughly 20 years in that sense. But isn't it very fortuitous that it was Indonesia last year, it's India this year, it's Brazil next year, and South Africa the year after. And so the fact remains that 4 developing countries are the presidents of the G20 precisely at a time when the focus is on building a broader consensus on challenges to do with developmental issues. Now, it's nobody's case that you can actually deal with the current debt distress in 75 countries or more, that you can deal with the great challenge of climate change, and particularly green transitions, and finding adequate finance for such green transitions without the involvement of the global South. There is absolutely no way that any of these global challenges can be addressed adequately without the fullest participation and a presentation of views and concerns by the global South. So this is a great moment, a great opportunity where 4 successive leaderships of the global South will have a chance to keep the agenda before the global community, an agenda that concerns the global South. So I think it's an opportunity to give primacy and centrality back to back on all the issues that matter to the global South. And without the global South's participation, without their concerns being met, there is nothing that you can achieve. Net zero will remain a chimera if the global South is not helped with regard to what you call adaptation. And so it's not just mitigation that matters, it's also adaptation. And for climate adaptation, you will require a lot of finance to make the necessary green transitions. And if you do not speak to the global South, if you do not allow them to raise their issues, how on earth will you achieve this? We have seen that the World Bank and the IMF have also remained somewhat mired in the past. If you look at the IMF, its reviews have led to some changes in the past. We know for a fact that in the immediate aftermath of the global financial and economic crises in 2008, the IMF had given additional basic voting rights to many countries. We know that the quota system was also slightly tinkered with around 2010 when the 14th review took place of the IMF. But the fact remains that even within the IMF today, you cannot bring about any change without 85% consensus. But one single country, the United States of America, has voting rights, a quota of more than 17%. So there is a complete veto there in Washington. The point I'm making is that the voice of the global South will have to be heard on every big challenge before us today, whether it is energy security, food security, or even what we call security with regard to availability of adequate finance, and also cheaper finance. We have to look at the interest rates at which finance is being offered to different parts of the world. Africa, for instance, gets the rough end of the stick, very high interest rates. India is somewhere in between, and many other countries get finance at much cheaper rates. So we have to look at this as a whole. So this is like really a boat in which we all sail or sink together. There is no exceptionalism or privileged participation today at the global level on the part of any country.
Ambassador Sujan, again, absolutely appreciate the time you've given us and sharing your expertise and your experience. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, sir.
Very happy to be with you. Thank you.
Pleasure's all ours. And for our viewers, do send in your feedback. Follow our social media handles. You can get the latest that we put up on our website or interviews like this with Ambassador Sujan Chinoy on our YouTube site as well. There's a UPI code that's flashing on your screen if you care to support us. This is Talking Point on StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh Revi.